Ever feel like you just totally bombed something?
Mm-hmm.
Like a project went completely sideways or an interview just tanked? Yeah, it can feel like the world is ending, you know?
It really can.
Today we're taking a deep dive into this piece called How to Turn Failure into Success.
Interesting.
And exploring how even big failures can set you up for some pretty amazing things.
You know, it's funny. We always think of failure as the opposite of success.
Right.
But this source is saying it could actually be part of the same path.
Yeah.
And some of the stories they use to illustrate that point are pretty wild.
Yeah, I was surprised by some of these examples.
Oh, yeah.
Like Henry Ford, you know, the guy behind Ford Motor Company?
Yeah.
He actually went bankrupt twice
Wow.
before Ford Motor Company took off.
I did not realize that.
Crazy, right?
Yeah, that's a good example of how even the most successful people don't always get it right on the first try or, even the second or third try.
Right.
But I think what's really interesting is what we can learn from those failures.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, what stood out to you in that section about Ford?
Honestly, I kind of skimmed over that part.
Yeah.
Figured it would be the typical rags to riches story.
Right.
But knowing he had these huge setbacks really makes you think twice about it, doesn't it?
It does.
What I find fascinating is how many really iconic success stories
Yeah.
start with some kind of major failure.
Mm-hmm.
Like Ariana Huffington.
Oh, yeah?
Her second book was rejected by 37 publishers.
Oh, why?
Steve Jobs was fired from Apple,
Yeah.
the company that he founded.
The company he founded.
Do you think there's something about that level of rejection
Mm-hmm.
that pushes people to succeed later on?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Makes me think about this concept called the blink to fail, fast, fail often.
Okay.
You familiar with that?
I've heard of it.
Basically, the idea is that by failing quickly and frequently, you gather more information and you learn faster.
Okay.
It's like every failure is this data point
Yeah.
that helps you get better and refine your approach.
Yeah. So it's about,
Like Jobs, for example.
okay.
He learned a lot when he wasn't at Apple.
Right.
I mean, he founded NextT,
Right.
which was later acquired by
Like Apple.
Apple.
Yeah.
And so many of those innovations he developed during that so-called failure period
Yeah.
became crucial to Apple's later success.
So it's almost like each setback, even if it feels huge at the time,
Right.
is kind of redirecting you towards something better.
Yeah.
Like the universe is saying, nope, not that way, try again.
Exactly.
Huh.
Failure can show us our weaknesses
Okay.
and force us to adapt and improve.
So like,
Think about Starbucks.
okay.
Howard Schultz's first idea for the company was all Italian, like an all-Italian menu, and it totally bombed.
Really?
But that failure forced him to really analyze what customers wanted.
Yeah.
And that led to the Starbucks we know today.
Okay, so I'm starting to see a pattern here.
Yeah.
Failure is not just something to avoid. It can show us what we need to work on and push us in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Do you think that applies outside of business too?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Like in the source, they talk about this study that found scientists whose grant proposals were rejected
Yeah.
ended up publishing way more successful papers later on
Really?
than the scientists who got the funding right away.
Wow.
So it suggests that failure can actually push us to work harder and achieve even greater things.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So how do we actually harness this power of failure?
Mm-hmm.
Because let's be real, failing still feels terrible.
Yeah, that's where this whole idea of the discomfort zone comes in.
Okay.
It's all about intentionally stepping outside of our comfort zones
Right.
and embracing situations where there's a chance we might fail.
So you're saying we should actually be looking for ways to fail.
Well, think of it like this.
Okay.
We build resilience by facing challenges head on and learning how to deal with them.
Yeah.
So by intentionally putting ourselves in situations where we might not succeed,
Okay.
especially in low-stakes situations, we get used to that feeling of discomfort
Yeah.
and build up our tolerance for it.
Like a vaccine for fear of failure.
Exactly.
Haha. I like that.
But how do you actually go about doing that?
Right, because I think most of us spend our lives trying to avoid failure, not
Yeah.
lean into it.
Yeah. Well, one approach they mention in the source is the aim to fail exercise.
Okay.
Have you heard of that?
Aim to fail.
Yeah.
That sounds a little counterintuitive.
I know, right? It's basically about setting a goal or trying something new with the expectation that you might not succeed.
So you're really saying we should aim to fail.
It might sound strange, but think about it this way.
Okay.
By intentionally failing, you kind of take away the fear and stigma around it.
Right.
It becomes less of a personal attack and more of a learning experience.
Yeah.
Plus, You might be surprised by what you discover in the process.
Okay, I'm starting to see how that could be useful.
Yeah. But what about when failure happens outside of those aim-to-fail exercises?
Right.
How do you deal with the emotional fallout from a real setback?
Well, that's where reflection and analysis come in.
Okay.
It's not enough to just brush it off and move on.
Right.
You have to break it down, figure out what went wrong, and how you can do better next time.
So we use failures as information to help us improve.
Exactly.
But sometimes it's hard to be objective when you're in it.
Oh, absolutely.
When you're feeling disappointed or embarrassed.
Yeah, some of those psychological barriers can really get in the way. The source talks about something called the spotlight effect.
Okay.
Which is this tendency we have to overestimate how much other people notice our mistakes.
Oh, yeah, I know that one.
Like when you trip and fall in public.
Exactly.
And you're convinced everyone saw you and they're all judging you.
Yeah.
But in reality, people are way less focused on our slip-ups than we think.
Probably true.
Recognizing the spotlight effect can help us let go of some of that embarrassment.
And focus on what we can learn.
So it's all about shifting our perspective
Right.
and realizing that failure is just a normal part of life.
Yeah.
Not some kind of indictment on us as people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the more we normalize it, the more likely we are to take chances and try new things and achieve bigger things.
That makes a lot of sense. But normalizing failure seems like it has to happen on a larger scale, not just individually.
You're absolutely right. The source also talks about this idea of fostering a culture of acceptance around failure.
Okay.
Especially in the workplace.
Interesting.
They even talk about the fearless organization.
I haven't heard of that.
It's basically about creating a work environment where people feel comfortable speaking up, sharing ideas, and taking risks without being afraid of punishment or humiliation.
So a space where it's safe to experiment and potentially fail without being judged or penalized?
Yeah. And when people feel safe to fail, they're more likely to think outside the box and come up with innovative ideas.
Right.
And that's how real progress happens.
Yeah. It sounds like psychological safety is key here.
Absolutely.
But how do you actually create that kind of environment?
Right.
Because I think a lot of workplaces operate from a place of fear, where failure is seen as this big weakness.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like a huge shift, doesn't it?
It is.
Moving from being afraid to fail to actually embracing it.
Yeah. It takes real effort,
Yeah.
from leaders especially, to create a culture where learning and growth are more important than being perfect. It's about celebrating effort and the lessons you learn, even when things don't go as planned.
So how can leaders really show that vulnerability? How do they show their teams it's okay to mess up?
Well, I think it starts with leading by example. Leaders need to be open about their own mistakes, share what they've learned, and create a safe space for others to do the same.
Yeah.
It's about creating this environment where failure is seen as valuable feedback.
Right.
Not like the end of the world.
Not a catastrophe.
Yeah, exactly.
It's saying fail fast, fail often.
Right.
The more we're okay with failing, the faster we can learn and get better.
Exactly. It's about shifting the focus from avoiding failure to maximizing learning.
This has been such a great conversation.
It has.
I feel like I have a whole new way of thinking about setbacks.
I'm glad.
What's one big takeaway you hope listeners will remember from our deep dive today?
I'd say the most important thing is to remember that failure isn't the end.
Right.
It's a chance to learn and adapt and become more resilient.
Yeah.
So embrace the discomfort zone.
Yeah.
Be curious about your setbacks and don't be afraid to fail forward.
I love that, fail forward. So much better than just failing.
Right.
Is there anything else our listeners should check out
Oh, yeah.
if they want to learn more about this whole turning failure into success thing?
Definitely. We recommend reading the full piece.
Of course.
How to Turn Failure into Success. It's got even more insights and tips on building resilience and turning those setbacks into stepping stones.
And one final thought for everyone listening.
Okay.
Think about the environments you're in at work, at home, in your communities. How can you help create a culture where it's safe to take risks and learn from both successes and failures?
Such a good point.
It's a challenge.
It is.
But we think the rewards are worth it.